With all the pressure, the self-doubt, and the feeling of imposter syndrome that comes with being in medical device sales, how do you find your success? Or how do you even convert these emotions into your secret for your long-term success? In this episode, you'll hear what actually separates those who thrive from the people who wash out, and how to approach the work with the right mindset, habits, and preparation. Welcome to Expert Insights, where we focus on healthcare, medtech, business, and sales. My guest is Steve Scarpati, who has 15 years in medical device sales. He came into the industry without a medical background, started in sales at 3M. Then he got his shot through a conversation that turned into an interview with DePuy, Johnson & Johnson. Since then, he's truly lived the reality of the OR and always seems to be at the forefront of robotics, navigation, and other technology-driven launches. We talk about what it takes to earn trust in these high-stakes clinical environments, training, mentorship, and why your freshman window closes so fast. How imposter syndrome can become a strength if it's pushing you to prepare. In this episode, we learn a lot from his history. What makes a demo effective, what ruins what should have been a good demo, his experience on startups versus big organizations, and what it really means to build a successful program within a facility, not just getting your robot purchased. So if you're trying to get into medical sales or know someone who is, check out MedSales Blueprint at school.com/MedSalesBlueprint. That's SKOOL.com, MedSales Blueprint. If you enjoy this podcast, subscribe and share with someone who you think will appreciate it. I welcome you to message me on LinkedIn to submit a question or recommend a guest. You can also find Steve on LinkedIn as well. Now let's get into the podcast.
Yeah, enjoy it while you can, man. It's funny. It's like, I feel like once you're like in the job, it almost like compels you to embrace intermittent fasting. It's like, yeah. Like now you'll actually get to like schedule your meals and all that, where it's like, when you're at the mercy of the OR, it's just like, who knows? But
have some
enjoy
protein
while
bars
you
and
can.
snacks.
But I will say this though, is that, I find like what you're delivering, and there's clearly a market for this type of service, right? I think you're onto something, because I just see you as someone who's done it. And I think if anyone's done it for 15 years, you might want to listen. And I'll say this too, is that, so with some of these other like larger courses, so as a hiring manager, I remember the first time I interviewed someone from one of these where I was blown away because they had this prepared binder. Well, the problem is that the second and third candidates had the same binder.
Yeah.
So I think if you can use this type of practical advice as a guide, but not a template, because you still want to be yourself,
Yeah.
and I think you're offering that pragmatic advice. So, yeah, I'd say whether you want this recorded or not,
Yeah.
it's interesting that you and I really only met like 15 years ago. But
Yeah.
I thought that it was, I was kind of proud of you to see you pop back up and offering this, advice for the next generation. So,
I appreciate
hats off
that.
to you. And I would just say to anyone that's curious, I mean, Pedro does know what he's talking about. So I would take that with a lot of consideration. It's a big move for anybody, but Pedro does know what he's talking about.
Thank you, man. Was it it's looking on LinkedIn, 20 years for you now? Selling medical sales since
Probably
3M?
more like 15 total.
Okay.
I actually started not in medical. So I was selling for 3M for about 5 years first. So I was doing like industrial tapes and adhesives and all that sort of stuff. So I had no idea I was going to end up in this field.
Interesting. And then what brought you over to medical sales?
It was an anesthesiologist and a CrossFit gym who just thought that like, hey, I guess he was friends with an orthopedic surgeon. Somehow he mentioned, have you ever heard of this company, DePuy? I said, I did not. I said, well, do you know Johnson & Johnson? Yes, I do. And somehow, they were kind enough to get me an interview, and I suppose the rest is history.
Incredible. Yeah. So I just put out an article the other day, and essentially your story is similar, in my opinion, to other people's stories and how they get into medical sales, where it was, I chalk it up to luck. I bumped into this person said, hey, I think you'd be good at this. I have an idea of what they're kind of looking for, and I think you have it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mind you, to whoever's listening, that being the majority of stories of how people get in, they didn't see the resume. They didn't see what you did for a living. It was all about who you are as a human. So when you interview, that's what they're looking for, right? Anyway, so I'm seeing an adjustment, a change in the industry being where I'm at, helping people get into medical sales and doing my research and building that network. And I'm recognizing that in order for people to get hired nowadays, it's almost the majority need to have come through some form of significant referral, not just I have a buddy, but like someone who's been in the industry and is actually championing that person, or they're going through some sort of course, because the problem is the turnover. And you've seen it, we've
Yeah.
all seen it, where there's people who are constantly leaving, either leaving the industry or leaving to go to another company. And on the associate level, it's leaving the industry. Hey, this isn't for me. This isn't what I thought it was at all. If you
Yeah.
take the time in to educate yourself through a platform, a course, have a champion that's really going to talk to you about what it's like, then you really know what you're getting into. And that's less chance for the organization to have this turnover and have people leave after they've invested all this time and energy to hire you, 6 months of training. And then you're like, whoa, this is crazy. I don't want this life. So from where we've came from, yeah, I mean, great. We're grateful for the luck. They still want that same human, I think, but the process has changed a
Yeah.
bit. Are you seeing that?
Yeah. I also think that for those of us who, I don't know about you, but this never crossed my mind. I did not have a medical background whatsoever, did not go to school for it. So I think when you start with this root gratitude that you have this shot, I
Yeah.
think it carries you through a lot of the subsequent challenges that are also associated with the business. But when you realize that, like, when I see a lot of these other candidates that were either maybe they were pre-med or they're engineers, where they kind of have a sense that this is what they want to do. Maybe those of
Yeah.
us that didn't come from that, we don't have this expectation, right? So you realize that you were given this shot, which frankly, for a lot of us, this business allows you to punch above your weight. So I think that underlying gratitude carries you through the inevitable grind that will come with this business.
Right. That's interesting. Gratitude through the idea that this is something obviously something that I'm glad has been granted to me. But like, if you look at it through the lens of this isn't something that I really ever thought I'd have an opportunity to do. This is something that
Absolutely.
is a privilege to be a part of.
Correct. That's right.
Interesting. Honestly, dude, as you say that, I envision some of the, like, when I was young, some of the reps that I would look up to, them saying that. And like the blue collar guys have
Hmm.
the work ethic and the intelligence and and the other aspects of it to be really strong medical sales reps in the operating room, in and out, convincing doctors dying on their sword for their rep, like those guys. Like the doc who's like, I'm sticking with my rep. My rep has my back. I trust that guy. Those reps are the ones who are super grateful. They never thought they'd have the opportunity to stand in and help a patient, help a doctor, help a patient. That's really, really interesting. I haven't really thought
I've
of
got
it that
another
way, but
interesting
that was so
theory
much
on
of
this
it.
too.
Yeah.
I've got a theory on this, Pedro, where I think when you didn't start off in this business or have any delusion to even do it,
Yeah.
um, correct me if I'm wrong, but I came into this with significant imposter syndrome, and it carried with me subsequently throughout my career, right? So
Yeah.
the notion of me being in the OR, I remember like it was, so I was with the Pew, so I was mostly doing, hips and knees, but it was one of the first hemi hips. So there's a fractured hip for those who may not be familiar, where it was like one of the first times I'm in the OR by myself, right? And I'm thinking I was selling tape for 3M 3 months ago. Now this surgeon who's predominantly say like a foot and ankle guy is looking for my guidance to put in hip implant. Like this is absurd. And then, that followed me through getting into robotics and then some leadership and all that. But I think when you have that imposter syndrome, Well, how do you overcome that? I think that's maybe it kind of compels you to be a little bit more prepared. Maybe ask a few more questions. Maybe take a
Yeah.
few more notes. So it's interesting how in time, because you're comparing yourself to these brilliant engineers or these pre-med students who just seemingly have such a leg up. But I think in time, that little bit of doubt actually becomes a strength because you're constantly preparing, you're constantly learning, you're constantly answering questions. And I don't think any surgeon likes those of us who think we know it all. So when you know you don't know it all and you're constantly asking questions over time, that thirst of curiosity actually gives you a wealth of knowledge that in time could be of use to these surgeons. It
Great
takes a
call.
long time for those of us to find that voice in the OR. But when it happens, it's a pretty special privilege that we have in this business.
Yeah. Because if you arrive in this world with arrogance, right? There's a
Hmm.
certain thing you have to be confident, right, to push through, an inner confidence. But if you have any sort of arrogance, it's gonna not just show, but if I'm understanding correctly, to your point, it's gonna hinder your ability to really work hard to make sure that the job gets done. The imposter
Sure.
syndrome leads to a sense of fear and nervousness. Some of the best reps that I've seen, they're constantly fearful of not being there for their customer or not
Hmm.
having what they need or not knowing what they need to know before they enter that room so that they can be there for them, right? As opposed to like an air of arrogance, like I got this, that comes
Hmm.
from something built up in your head rather than I put in the work, the hours. Last night I showed up and I double checked the trays, or I made sure everything that is going to be okay from this nervous energy of imposter syndrome. Like I'm just grateful to be here. I love
Right.
that. Could you, since we got started so quickly, man, could you just give us a brief overview who you are, where you're from, so people get some context?
Sure.
Uh,
So I grew up just outside of New York, so in Westchester County. Um, I think you and I became friends over baseball. So I did get to play some baseball in college and,
That's right.
grateful for all that. So I think a lot of us do have that, sports background. But ultimately, yeah, just got started in sales. So I was just selling for 3M was my first big job, but I was selling plenty of other things before that. I remember to date myself a little bit, I was selling for Verizon, and at the time it was these online yellow pages. And I remember having a day where I was like 0 for 70 of just like knocking on business doors. So I guess there was that underlying grind, which I think the word grind is probably a ongoing theme that I think about for this business. Um, but I
Mm,
will say this. So working for 3M, it did teach me how to be a sales professional. And that's where I learned the value of a demo. And that's something that would carry me throughout my career.
okay.
Um,
Yeah.
so then this, as I said, there was this anesthesiologist that provided me an opportunity to get in front of some hiring managers at Depew. And so it's like, how do you bridge that gap where you have zero experience, seemingly relative to medical device? And I think what bridged the gap was two things. It was a demonstration of being able to sell something, which I think if now, Pedro, you were a hiring manager, you were a sales manager, right, for strike or
Yeah.
trauma, right?
Yeah.
If anybody can sell anything, if you're a manager, that's curious, right? I think it just gives you something to think about. Like, okay, well, convincing somebody to buy anything in this business, like nothing happens in any business until somebody can sell something. So that gives you
Right.
at least a conversation. The
Hmm.
other piece of it is if you can show that you learned something else quickly and then applied it. So though, if you give the whole idea
Oh.
that, listen, if you teach
Hmm.
me, I'll take care of the rest. And that's where you do have to have a little bit of that confidence where um, it bridges that gap with maybe I'm not ready to go in the OR solo today, but if you can meet me halfway with a little bit of training, and the notion of training is challenging in this business because you're going to encounter a wide range of training, right? That's a very vague
Yeah.
term. If you
Yeah.
work for Stryker, you're probably going to have a pretty formal training process, intuitive. They're going to have a relatively, formal training process. A lot of it is you're just going to be shadowing, probably, maybe somebody that's slightly more experienced. A lot of it's going to be on you too, though, right? You have to be self motivated. You have to be willing to, spend the time on your own, dive into your trays, dive into the surgical techniques. So I think that notion of training is a little bit complicated, but you better be pretty self motivated to figure it out too.
Let me ask you. You brought up some good points, and I want to touch on the demo. But when it comes to training, so let's say somebody gets hired on an entry level job. How long for them to feel like they can go ahead and cover a surgery if they're an orthopedic surgical sales rep, right? For people
Yeah,
listening, there's plenty of medical sales roles that don't even require to be in the operating room, let alone orthopedics. But
sure.
for you, Steve, going from 3M to suddenly a surgeon is operating on a patient in front of you, how long until you're able to handle a surgical case without someone there from your company? You're the representative by yourself, and how long until you feel comfortable?
That's a great question. The reality is that day will find you, whether you're ready or not.
Mm.
So
It will.
don't waste time being new. Your rookie card is going to expire quickly. So that's a
Mm.
very layered answer here where you could think about increments of say 3, 6, 9, 12 months. I'd say I would prefer a good year to really understand things inside out. But well, Pedro, that if there's that fracture and you're on call and somebody else is going to dinner with the surgeon, you're it.
Yeah.
And so I would just have that healthy paranoia that your day may come sooner than you think. So over prepare. Um, maybe have some resources in your back pocket where, let's say, if you know your day is coming up, but you at least have, say, like your more experienced teammate on the ready, where worst case scenario, you can say timeout to your surgeon, let me be sure. So there are ways of overcoming those days.
Right.
Don't think you have to be perfect the first time, but I would say err on the side of making sure that you're right. Don't guess, prepare as best you can. But that's where your senior teammates hopefully put you into a position to succeed.
Right.
And I would say that
100%.
the notion of like mentorship with your teammates is something that we could probably do a better job of in the industry. I'm sure there's a range of how willing reps are to take on the next generation. But I
Yeah.
do think that's where we could actually really help the next generation of reps is if we're all just a little bit more thoughtful and generous to the next generation and just set them up for success. So if it's just taking a little extra time where maybe we double check the implant to check the trays, are they ready to succeed? Are we setting that expectation with that surgeon saying, hey, listen, I'm going to send a junior guy in, let me know if there's any issues. So we're not just
Right.
setting yourselves up for failure.
That brings up a really good point. And one thing I firmly believe or have observed is that, and this is not this is not just with this industry. Uh, the managers, territory managers, localized managers are pretty much the most successful sales guy. They
Hmm.
they move up naturally because of their business requires them to oversee the new people in the area. But
Right.
they didn't move up because they displayed wonderful managerial um, traits. Now,
Right.
maybe, yeah, it's like you got two key, great, strong sales reps. I'm going to go with the guy who seems like he's going to, bring on the young Padawans and turn them into Jedis at some point.
Yeah.
It's it's not a necessity, and I think if there's one thing that is missing, generally speaking, in this industry, not that a lot of companies aren't doing this, but they're not giving enough training on how to manage young talent to those who are brand new in the managerial role,
Right. I
especially
think we're
especially when they're
often just
selling and managing. Yeah.
right. I think we're often just trying to survive the day. And it's
Yep.
hard to take that minute to actually really extrapolate and plan out your business.
Hmm.
So just the pace of surgery, and we're all trying to be in multiple places at the same time, and chasing trays, chasing implants, what's expired, what's on back order, all the stuff, right? So it takes some deliberate time to really think and be thoughtful about, well, okay, if I've got this new rep, how do we, make sure we set them up for success, give them opportunities to slowly, incrementally take on more responsibility. And ultimately, if you can get to the point where, they become self-sufficient and you don't need them, but, they are going to need some training wheels early on to
Oh
get
yeah,
going.
inevitable, 100%. I wanted to ask you another question, and I'm grateful that you're touching on the entry level aspects of this. A number of
Hmm.
my clients, and future clients will appreciate this. You were selling before you got into medical sales. Do you think selling is a requirement? This is not a direct question. What are your feelings on people who come into medical sales with sales experience, without sales experience, with healthcare experience, without healthcare
My
experience?
stance on this has evolved. You have to have a sales background to succeed in this business. And I used to think that you needed to. And
Yeah.
I remember when I worked for IntelliJoint. So this was at the time, it was a Canadian startup company. We were in the hip nav space.
Oh yeah.
And they had a bunch of really young, talented engineers that they taught to sell. And that became a pretty powerful punch where not only are they these bright engineers, but they also had that capacity to get out and sell. So I've learned in time that you don't necessarily have to be that stereotypical extrovert. You do have to have a little bit of that courage to be willing to speak up, but you could provide value and leadership in a lot of different ways. Some do it quietly just by being prepared and being, I would say, dependable, reliable, and you find your way of helping your surgeons. But when we talk about sales, I think there's a misconception that we're all just trying to sell you something like this pen at, the scrub sink, right? In reality, medical sales is a fairly long process, no matter what you're selling. And I think it's more about having these consistent habits over time that I just don't think it's fair to put anybody into a box about who you are, what your background is, to dictate whether or not you can be successful in that.
Mm.
I think it's way more to do with your personal compass and what you're willing to do and put into it in any endeavor. So if anybody has that curiosity about getting to this business, I wouldn't hold your current personality, background, school. Don't let that dictate what you want to do moving forward. You have plenty of ways to add value regardless of your background.
I love that. I love that. And for those listening, that was not planned, because I believe the same. I truly do. Obviously, you have an advantage if you were selling. That puts a manager at ease if you're coming
Hmm.
into a sales role. Um, but it's an experience that can be lent to. And if someone can tell a story about themselves, their past experiences, and why what they've gone through in their lives will lend to why this is why I'm going to be successful in this role,
Hmm.
that's your advantage, right? It doesn't necessarily need to be sales. Or you're going to have to overcome the fact that the manager is going to say, hey, I
Another
need you to
thing
hit
that's
your
interesting
quota.
too, Pedro,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious if you've experienced this yourself, where I think it's also actually pretty useful long term to have different backgrounds. So the notion of, say, selling as a team.
Right.
So maybe I already had a sales background, and let's just say maybe I'm more of like the schmoozer, right? But if I have somebody that has a little bit more of that technical acumen, that's a pretty powerful person to have waiting in the wings. So often, if we had maybe a more advanced sales call, maybe having a couple teammates, if you could swallow your pride and just have a couple teammates at your flank, one or two, maybe they can answer more technical questions better than I can today. All of a sudden, as a team, you become a little bit more, you know,
Yeah.
I would say indefensible, right? And you're a
Mm-hmm.
little bit more prepared for whatever may come your way. Furthermore, I think it's an opportunity for me as a more experienced salesperson to give that exposure to an up and coming rep. So I may not know going to that call how much this particular rep is going to contribute, but A, I've got that security of knowing that, maybe this engineer can provide something, but if nothing else, they can see the cadence of what a sales call looks like, and we're learning on the fly.
Right. Dude, well said. You see things like someone who's been in the industry for quite a bit, right? The different personalities, different experiences lend to a stronger team. Especially when
Correct.
you're like, all right, who should go cover this hospital? Or who should go call on this doctor? Or who's going to be the one who's going to specialize in this specialized product that only gets used once a month, but it's highly technical, like a total
Yeah.
ankle or something like that. Who's going to be the one on the team that's going to be a specialist on this, right? Because that happens a lot.
Mhm.
As a sales rep, you're brought in on a team of maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 people to cover a number of areas, so that somebody can go away on a holiday and everyone else covers the territory. But generally speaking, you don't want all the same person. You want male,
Right.
female, different backgrounds, different understandings of things, so that you have this diverse group that can blend in with whatever the territory requires.
If you've made it this far, go ahead and click subscribe now so you do not miss the next one. And if you or a friend want help breaking into medical sales, the best place to go is medsalesblueprint.com.
It's funny how it all
Um,
works.
I also think that it's like, and I was thinking about this too. It's like, what do I have to offer? It's like, because there's a reality that on like most days in this business, I don't know that you feel all that successful. It's such a daily grind, and you're like that paranoia doesn't really leave you, right? And
Yeah.
we're constantly battling that. But if you do take a minute and you think about, even on an annual basis, you think about, say like 3-month increments, and then you extrapolate beyond a couple of years. It's like actually over time, we've done some pretty cool stuff. Worked with some pretty cool teams. And it's like, you do slowly see this, little bit of impact we're able to have. And if, I think it's more so that like, um, it's a great life if you could stick it out. And I think if we can kind of help coach people on proper expectations for the business, and just to kind of prepare yourself for maybe some of that inevitable change that may occur.
Yeah. No, but wonderful point. There's very few times throughout your career where it's like, I am really great at what I do. Like, everybody's giving you a pat on the back. Like, very rarely does that happen. And you really cherish those moments. And I'll go over a couple general moments that I think a medical sales rep will feel that sense of like, they pause from all the chaos, all the
Right.
imposter syndrome, all the nerves of making sure, you're covering all this, whack them all with every problem that's going on in your territory, right? But then there's these moments. One is
Yeah.
like, maybe like a difficult situation with a customer or involving a patient, and you really helped out. And now that patient is going to do much better because of you. And you had
Yeah.
more of a direct impact than you normally would. And you're like, fuck yeah, right? I wouldn't have been able to help that person if I hadn't been 3 years into the industry, know everything I know, and taken the extra
Hmm.
step and said this, or showed up with this, or given this piece of advice to the nurse or whoever. And then there's like another situation where you might have that is, depending on your company, if you have like a national sales meeting where they recognize you, and you soak it up for that long weekend or whatever it is, and you get your pat on the back, you get your president's club, and then it's like back to hitting quota. And then you have a moment like this where you're 15 years into the industry and we're
Well,
chatting, you're like, holy shit, I do know a few things.
I'll tell you this though, like anytime you endure that value analysis gauntlet and like you get to the other side, you should take a minute. The challenge is that it's pretty
Yeah.
short lived, because then it comes to the next launch and all that. And I heard you talking about when you're your prior podcast, where it's almost hard to know like when is it appropriate to celebrate. Um,
Mm,
I think we do have to have a pretty short memory, good and bad, in this business. I do think we have to stay pretty even keeled. But um, it takes a a hell of a lot of grit and grind to get through any value analysis process that's designed to keep us out. So if
Yeah.
you found a way through, um, if you, and even if you've done it once, I could assure you, you have value someplace else.
Right.
Cause it is not for the faint of heart, but if you can pull that off, I think it's something to be celebrated.
So there's a couple of topics that we said we were going to touch on, and I want to make sure we get to them.
Sure.
And if I can choose myself, I'd like to touch on the big company versus startup
Hmm.
aspect of things. I've been with big companies, I've been with youthful companies, and I might be joining a startup potentially. You have varying experiences in these
Yeah.
places. Thoughts, opinions, feedback. Where are you at with that?
Sure. I don't think there's a right or wrong. And I think when we get our first opportunities, it's not always up to us to choose that.
Yeah.
I do think there's merit in starting with a big company. Now, again, I started with a large company before I was in medical device, but I do think that maybe they offer a little bit more of that training where you have that foundation that can carry you the rest of your career. I think there's a notion that, you see a lot of former striker reps or former intuitive reps where we think that they probably had some pretty good training.
Mm,
Um, I do also think that some good things to think about as you're selling anything. As I mentioned earlier, having those big names does help. And I do think that you need to check your own ego a little bit if you go from a large company to a small company where, yes, we all have prior relationships, but it does become a little bit humbling where I can tell you that it's going to take a little bit more grit and grind to get over the hump to sell something for a startup than if you already have, say, Zimmer, Stryker, Smith and Nephew, behind your back.
yeah.
Um, but I will also say that there's something very rewarding for working for a startup. So often when you're working for a large company, you're taking on inherited business, right? They already probably have a book of business. You're going to be assigned to surgeons that already are using your implants, product, whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's a pretty powerful feeling to just contribute something completely new to the industry. When you start with, a startup that say you're now taking on commercialization, where through your teammates, through your founders, you somehow find a way to add some new, unique value to the industry. It's a tougher climb. It's not as financially secure. I think there is some risk reward there. But it's a pretty powerful feeling if you can be part of that team that has this indelible mark in the business that wasn't there prior to that endeavor.
Right. You touch on something it's an interesting dynamic that's going on with my clients, and I want to hear anybody who's looking to get into the industry, actually anyone who's in medical sales, should consider this aspect when it comes to onboarding people and new hires. There's a lot of really great candidates out there, but
Hmm.
it's tough to get a legitimate job. Everybody wants to go for the Medtronics, J&J,
Sure.
Stryker, Boston Scientific, Intuitive, the big name, the giants out there, and jump in with them. They have the benefits. You have the business card. Look who I'm working
Sure.
for. I'm proud of myself. How much time do you want to spend trying to get into one of those jobs? Right? How much
Hmm.
time do you want to spend networking, applying month after month, trying to get in? Now, you can get in right away, maybe not. If you look at the odds, it's not. If you're not getting yourself some help, some
Right.
support to give yourself that leg up over the thousands of other people trying to get in there. Now, so one of the things I recommend to my clients, and again, recommend, I tell no one what to do. I said, this is what I would do if I were you, and I feel strongly about this, or, up to you. I say, look, there's opportunities here where you'll be at 1099, right? Maybe
Hmm.
there's no base pay in this, but they're going to sign you up and allow you to go door to door, go knocking. And when that territory manager's in town, they're going to teach you a little bit um, on how to sell. But you have the ability to just get
Hmm.
the ball rolling to be able to say, I've sold to doctors successfully. I don't know, but I was
Yeah.
Managers would love to see that. They would I think they would understand, like, they're going to be like, how much did you sell in that 6 to 9 months that you were just getting started in the industry? It's like, no, no, no. I just love the fact that you now understand what it's like to go to the person at the front desk and try and get past them to see a doctor to begin with. And you banged your head on the wall and people telling you no. And you went to the hospital and to the surgery center and to the PT facility to try and sell. And I get that you weren't successful, but everyone is unsuccessful at the beginning. And you kind of got a lot of that out of your way. There's value in that. And to
Yeah.
the final point, there's you said it at the very beginning, gratitude and privilege for actually joining an organization, being paired up with the senior sales rep who's had the territory, has all the business, and he's letting you in the operating room for you to be able to observe and learn
Mhm.
on the back of all of his years of hard work to get that business where you can just be let in, no problem.
I'll tell you this
That's a
too.
privilege.
There's a few other things about startups to think about too that may serve you well long term. Um, Someone once told me that number one, you may actually be able to grab a better title in a startup quicker. So that might
Yeah.
be transferable in the open market a little bit later on. So let's just say you get your first like regional, sales manager role. Well, maybe next time around that might actually have some, monetary value, on the open market, should you, inevitably come to that. I also think that, in these large companies, we're often in these like departments, right? It's like, I do this, you do that. In a startup, you're going to be compelled to wear a lot of different hats. And I think to understand any business from a broader perspective has value. So if you can have a little bit of empathy for somebody in a different department, and this is actually where I think a lot of technologies go wrong. It's not so much the technology itself that may dictate how a launch goes. I think it's the
Yeah.
alignment of the overall team. And I think the more you can understand what each function does, whether you're in it or not, but I think having that proximity to say the engineers, R&D, the founders, where's the funding even coming from? It's a very complex
Mm.
endeavor to take on any startup, but to have that appreciation for each person's unique role to make the bigger thing happen, I think could serve you well long term in career.
So if you had to choose one, would it be a large company or a youthful startup or
There's something
SMB?
about startup energy that I do like. Um, I mean, I think sometimes there's stability in the larger companies, and I mean, startups. It's a tough road because they all feel like they're maybe a couple months of running out of funding, right? So there's always a little bit of that risk of are we going to be able to endure this?
Yeah.
However, just comparing one job to the next, I think taking on those ambitious missions with, like, I just like doing difficult things with people I care about. And if you can do that in a startup culture, I think it's some pretty powerful
Heck yeah.
experiences above and beyond just what you do for a living. I think it's intrinsically rewarding to accomplish something like that.
For
And I
sure.
commend any founder who's willing to take that on. I mean, it's a hell of a gauntlet to try to start anything new. And Pedro, you see
Yeah.
the difference between like good ideas and actual companies, right? And those who actually are willing to do it. Um, Hats off to them. And I think for those of us that are in startups and you have that proximity to even say like the CEOs, and you're in, you get to be involved in this pretty high end decision making. It's interesting to have a lens into how they go about it.
Yeah. Well, so that brings me to a point that I've been waiting to touch on. Um, and I'll mention this in my intro that I give you at the beginning, where in quickly looking at your LinkedIn, anyone who knows the industry knows orthopedics. You kind of
Mhm.
have found yourself in this specialized place where you've always been at the forefront of not just orthopedics, not just joint replacement, but the placement of the instrumentation and or the implants, whether it's
Yeah.
navigation, guidance, robotics. So was it Think, Zimmer, Rosa, IntelliJoint,
Yeah.
right? All at the times that they were early on. You weren't just
Correct.
there randomly. You were there when it's like, let's get this to market, which is incredibly unique. Tell me
Yeah.
about that, what you learned about that, what's interesting about that. There's a lot of people who've never been a part of anything like that.
Yeah. So, Pedro, even going back to the beginning of even how I got into this business, I've been the beneficiary of others who saw something in me before I did. So, a lot of you may know Doug Eunice. So, Doug Eunice is now a co-founder of Monogram, right? And they just got acquired
Yeah.
by Zimmer. So, when I was at the Purette, um, Dr. Eunice and I were just talking in the surgeon's lounge, and he was doing some work with Think, and he's like, "Listen, I might need a guy to help me run a robot, and this was Mount Sinai." And remember, I talked about the sequential imposter syndrome. I said just how absurd it was that I was even allowed into an OR, and the notion I was even allowed to now work with a robot, right? Not an engineer, but you get these unique opportunities to challenge yourself. And I think when you sign up for things that kind of scare you just a little bit, that's where I think we are often at our best. So, yeah, so this would have been what I
Wow.
guess like 2013, which in the world of robotics is relatively new, right?
Yeah. That's the year
Um,
Stryker acquired Mako.
yeah, yeah. So it's been an interesting lens into the utility of technology in the OR. And this has become a passion of mine that's kind of endured throughout my career, which is that it's such a challenge, as I think about a lot of these founders and the evolution of technology, is that we have so many of these phenomenal ideas and the capabilities of what these things could do. But at the end of the day, what is the utility in the OR?
Mm.
So I've seen no shortage of what I refer to as like sawbone heroes, which is that you have all these technologies that can do a phenomenal demo at AUKUS, AAOS, and you get a lot of interest. But what is the true functionality in the OR? And I think as much as we try to move the needle with what can be done with technology, the harsh reality is that the tolerance for the inconvenience of the learning curve is quite low. So as much as we try to set those expectations as, you know, clinical reps or even capital reps about what that learning curve might look like, we can say it's 5 cases, we can say it's 10 cases, but I find that even on that first or second day where that surgeon feels like they're getting slowed down and it's just fussy, it could be the most phenomenal technology in the world, but they got to be able to keep up with their busy day. So
Yeah.
that's why I talk about any technology. And I said I've worked with robotics, navigation, augmented reality.
So true.
No matter what it is, you have to have that larger alignment with your surgeon. I think even just, I think about alignment between capital and clinical. So it's one thing to get those robots into a hospital. Do you have a
Yeah.
launch ready to go? So you worked with Mako, right?
Yeah.
How many times have you placed a robot that doesn't get used? That's where you have to
Mm.
have alignment between, because a sold robot that doesn't get used is of no value to the big companies, right?
Yeah. If anything, it
So it
hurts. It
really
hurts.
takes a coordination of a team in
Hmm.
order for any technology to succeed. So as I think about any technology moving forward, I would really think carefully about are you ready? Because once those surgeons start using it live, um, if it's going to slow them down, there's only so much tolerance they have to dealing with that learning curve. And it better provide some clear benefit of outcomes, whether it be, or even an opportunity to say, build their practices as some sort of differentiator that is obvious. Otherwise, they're just not going to tolerate that fuss factor. So I think, um, however, The integration of technology in surgery, when it works well and you see it as part of this like well-oiled machine, like a NASCAR pit crew, it's amazing. So there's a real value in coming together as a team where you could debate like the value of technology or robots, whether it be, outcomes, this, that. But I think those of us know that you could put the data aside. You know, when you've got those phenomenal cases where everybody's in sync and you know that robot did something that the human eye probably wasn't going to do. It might not
Mm,
quite pick it up.
hmm.
And we all think about like those of us who have been in thousands and thousands of surgeries. You see it takes time to see the subtleties between one surgery to the next. A lot of hip and knee replacements may seemingly look similar. But I think once you can really start to leverage technology to really dial in those nuances of each unique
Yeah.
case, each unique anatomy. Um, we talk about how often the value of robots or technology is to eliminate outliers, right?
Yeah.
I think of it the other way around. And a lot of the surgeons that I really love to work with, it's how do we optimize every case? And you think about any time we're putting
Yeah.
in a hip replacement, a knee replacement, you're talking about millions of cycles on that prosthesis. And you know, the, the implants themselves, the material science is phenomenal these days. But when you think about, how these components are balanced in the line over millions of cycles, when you ultimately think about what that means to your mother that's trying to pick up your kids, you know, down the road, I do think that it's these fractions in surgery that will have the lasting impact. And I think that, it's funny. I competed against, Stryker and Mako my entire career. You get to a certain point where you kind of tip your cap where I think all these big company robots are now at a point where they're all good. They can all put in the components in a great predictable manner.
Hmm.
I think where this is all going though is
Oh,
there
yes.
still
Tell
seems
me.
to be a lot of pardon?
No, I said yes. Where is this going?
Yeah. So I think about there seems to be a lot of like open-endedness in the business about, are the robots necessary? Um, and you see a lot of curiosity about things like, kinematic alignment, for example. I think it's the robots that have the ability to learn over time that are going to start really moving the needle. So I don't think it's going to be isolated to just a surgical event. I think we're going to find a way that whether it's a robot or another piece of technology, I think we're going to do a better job of extrapolating that patient's episode of care. And I think we're going to be able to learn a little bit more about, how can we measure ourselves over time? I don't know
Mm,
exactly how that's going to look, but I see a lot of really interesting companies out there that are thinking in a broader aperture than just the surgery itself. And to me, that's
right.
pretty exciting. And I think about, what is the role of, say, AI even in technology and surgery? I don't know that we all know, but I think if we can help our surgeons make better decisions, and I think that's going to lend itself to a more personalized approach for each patient. Because if you think about it, Pedro, like you were with Zimmer, or excuse me, you were with Stryker, I was with Zimmer. We still, by and large, have a lot of the similar components and implants for largely the masses, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I listen, the economics of how you figure that out for these big companies is well beyond me. But I do think we're going to get to a point where we're going to probably have a little bit more of a tailored approach depending on, each patient. Like, are you going to have the
Yeah.
same component for a ballerina versus a construction worker? I don't know. But
Right.
I think there's going to be this evolution in time about, a more
Yeah.
personalized approach.
Right. Rather than cruciate retaining or not. Right. Something
Right.
beyond the, 1, 2, 3 options that we have here. that a surgeon might feel that they have based on what they're using um, for a patient when they decide that they're actually going to do a joint reconstruction. Um, and I think that you're right with the advent of AI. They're even using I forgive me for not knowing. I don't forgive myself for not knowing. Where essentially, as they are continue to articulate, you're getting the pressure readouts and patterns of the use of their joint, right? These different tools and mechanisms that give the data back as the patient's home, both healing, but beyond the healing, and they get back to work, right?
Yeah.
When their PT's done, you're good to go. Your flexion and extension look good. Back at it, mobility's great, but like let's keep tracking that beyond the come back in 6 months, come back in
Yeah.
12 months, come back in 18 months. I think you're right. That will give them, that's just more data for them to account for when creating the next thing. There's technologies out there right now that are taking the soft tissue of a patient, putting it in a machine that's sitting in the OR, and then prints out a version of that to put back into the patient to heal a wound. In my
Mm.
mind, that is the very beginning of us 3D printing biology, the patient's native biology in the
Yeah.
room to then. So if you want to talk about custom implants and custom joints and the inventory issues, but maybe we can do something about that, et cetera, or custom instrumentation, which has been around for a while, varying types, but custom to the point where it's bioabsorbable of your own tissue. You're
Yeah.
right. We are going in a whole nother direction. I think, and the last thing I want to say, based on everything you said, I hope you give yourself credit. If there's one thing that I'm recognizing about you, is that you have a really good feel. And I literally, while you were talking, I was ChatGPTing like, well, how can I put this to words, what you do? And it's like an adoption predictor, a pattern recognizer, someone who understands the true clinical value of this. Hey, really interesting, cool idea, but here's why it's not going to work in the OR, right? Because of these time constraints. It's too big, it's too small. Why would they use it? When would they use it? There's so many different factors that go into why a technology might not work out. And I think you've been a part of so many, and you've seen so many that have failed, succeeded, et cetera, or have had to have an adjustment. So that I think what you offer is pretty valuable in that
Well,
sense.
have you been part of robotic surgery where you had to abort the case?
I've seen it, yeah. Or I've
Yeah.
I've
It
heard of it. I have
it's a
not
pretty
been in the
horrible
OR for that.
feeling, right?
Mhm.
So, um, when you've been part of that, for various reasons, we obsess about how to prevent that. And that's a much larger conversation, but, um, I mean, you say some very kind words, but a lot of that is just trial and error of being through some pretty tough days in the OR, and you learn over time, you do it enough, and, you learn from pretty good teammates along the way. And, can I tell you one other thing that I've kind of shifted on,
Yeah.
in this business of technology? So I remember, especially more so on the robotic side, thinking that the notion of marketing was almost like you're diluting the value of the robot itself. Where I always kind of had maybe this altruistic perspective of like, I always wanted it to just be about outcomes. And I've kind of shifted a little bit where I think there's two pieces of that can be at play with any emerging technology. And this is as someone that's over time become such a fan of these orthopedic surgeons that are doing anything they can to help their patients and frankly have a good living and a good practice.
Yeah.
So I think the notion of whether or not it's for like marketing purposes, I think I've kind of shifted where I think two things have to happen. You have to have that clinical conviction in any system that you're using. You kind of have to have that calibration between, do the numbers make sense between my eye and what this robot nav AR is telling me? You have to have that in order to have any trust in any system. But
Yeah.
the other part of it is, can it help me build my practice? And I think that's something I've leaned into more being in this technology space, which is that how can this be a tool in which we can then partner with surgeons? So I think about any technology now, it's really about like building, um, how can you build a, like, what am I trying to say here? How do you build successful programs? Okay.
Mm,
I really think that anytime you're endeavoring to bring in a new technology into a
yeah.
hospital, how can you build a program around it? And I say that because, again, going back to any value analysis committee that's designed to keep everybody out, you got to build something pretty powerful and lasting for any surgeon to willing to take the action to ask to have this expensive device brought into their ASC, hospital, whatever it is. But and this is where I remember I talked about how we have to kind of check our egos a little bit when we go from big companies to small companies. Your relationship alone will probably get you the meeting, but it may not necessarily be sufficient to initiate action, to actually buy something. There's a big difference
Right.
between meetings and demos and actually, taking that action to acquire something. Um, so that's where you really need to align with your surgeons in a way that's truly helping build their practice in whatever way they see fit. But I think that's where it becomes a lot of fun, where you get to know your surgeons, what makes them tick, what is it that they're trying to accomplish. So then when you can, in tandem, have interoperative success, but also help them achieve whatever it is that they're seeking.
Yes.
Um, Again, of all the stuff that you could do for a living, that's what helps us, I think, get through all the cancel cases, the tough days, and everything that goes along with it. But that's a pretty powerful thing to do for a living.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Doctors are stretched and stressed. Find me a doctor who's not stressed out, and I will
I'm
see
becoming
you never.
increasingly passionate about these like macro subjects, whether it be insurance and how they're,
The
just this whole
economics of
notion of
things.
getting, denials and all that. I see guys like Brian Blackwood who's trying to help take on some of the credentialing services and how absurd that can be. So I applaud anybody who's trying to tackle the macro issues and is taking action beyond just complaining about it. So I guess just long
Yeah.
term, I just think about how can we contribute to the solution. And even just, I see guys like Stu Brandon who are, those of us who've been through it long enough, we see that, there's different ways of going about your business as a rep. And if you can,
Yes.
some people are doing a nice job of finding some independence and sharing it with others about how they did it. One
Yeah.
thing that's also been interesting that you had on another one of your podcasts is this notion of financial planning. And I think that as we think about the longevity of our careers, and any of us, you see our LinkedIn posts, most of us have bounced around a couple different jobs for various reasons, right?
Yeah.
There could be layoffs, there could be a situation maybe it wasn't quite the right fit, or maybe you just got recruited to do something, more ambitious, whatever it is. Point being is that the the financials in our business do have a lot of ebbs and flows, whether it be just your capital cycle or or even just these startups that, the revenue can be fickle at times. It blows my mind that there are these financial planners that are dedicated to our business. But I think, you and I both being in this business for 15 years, I would probably lean on that earlier on in my career. And it may help you endure unforeseen things, or even maybe just having another eye to look at a financial package. Does this even make sense? Um,
Yes.
because
Yes.
you said it yourself, Pedro, we don't know what we don't know. But I think just looking back, I do wonder, did I leave some things on the table? Could I have been more thoughtful? Could I have asked better questions in our own interview process? And one thing I would encourage those who move on in this business is make sure that you're interviewing the company as much as they're interviewing you. I know that it's ambitious. We're all so excited to get into any job, but you do have to have a little bit of your own compass. And
Mm.
um, it's easy to get into a situation where all of a sudden you're in it and like, whoa, 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 this isn't quite what I thought. So I know each interview is its own balancing act, but we kind of have one shot to get it right and make sure that you're
Yeah.
setting yourself and your family for a good, financial situation.
You touch on some really great stuff. The financial aspect. That interview with Fletcher was was great. Getting to know Fletcher is great. And in my head, it's like, how are we going to convince guys to give up the power of managing their own finances and handing it off? And I'm realizing there's quite a few people out there that's like, yes, please. I come
Yeah,
from humble beginnings. I'm not exactly sure what to do with this money. I
right.
know what I want to do with it, but I know it's not right. It's not responsible. And again, I don't think I've ever said this on the podcast. I think medical sales is well equipped for someone who comes from a blue collar background, but can do well in a white collar setting,
Yeah,
right? Has that blue collar grit. I don't look, I'm staying after hours. I'm driving around. I'm being spoken to in a way that I, normally wouldn't accept in this situation, but I understand, right? But at the same time, you can put on a demonstration with a suit on, with a presentation to surgeons and directly articulate to them the reason why they should change what they're doing, right? And so those who come from the humble beginnings, which is plenty of us, don't
hmm
necessarily know what to do with our money. And a lot of guys, they allow their spouse to manage the money so that they don't have that stress on their mind, or they're, putting it under their bed. I don't know what they're doing. It's
yeah,
a really great point. Um, I want to ask you another thing. So I would imagine you've probably given more demonstrations than anyone that I know, probably rivaling, rivaling John Gibson over at Think, who did Mako demonstrations around the country. But you've done it with so many different technologies.
sure.
Tell me about what makes a really good demo? What ruins a demo? I'm sure people would love to hear that.
Yeah, and I would just say that for anybody getting into the business, mastering your demos is the best way to quickly and early, differentiate yourself from others.
Mm,
But I would say the big thing is knowing your audience. There's a big difference between, an in-service versus, a surgeon demonstration versus a training session for your teammates. And I've seen a lot
mm,
of cookie cutter demos where you're kind of doing the same thing every time. You need to have a range in how technical you're going to get. But you also have to be mindful of where are you relative to the sales cycle. So my point is that if
mm.
it's the first time your surgeon is seeing something, you don't have to get too far into the weeds. And frankly, you want to save some of the good stuff as you pull them through that sales cycle, right? So tying it relative to the sales cycle, knowing who your audience is. I also just think that we don't prepare enough for them. The demo is the catalyst for making anything happen in this business. And a lot of times we wing it, right? Whether maybe you're got a full day of cases or something. You got this one shot to now show somebody something. Doesn't matter what it
Right.
is. It doesn't have to be
Yeah.
a robot. It could be a new implant, a device, a biologic, whatever it is.
Hmm.
Um, I would really invest time in practicing that demo. It's everything from your body language, your posture, the cadence of your voice. How are you going to interject questions? How are you going to integrate your audience into what you're trying to do? What I mean by that is, Pedro, if I'm showing you something, it's one thing for me to show it to you. It's another thing for me to put it in your hand and let you try it. Um,
Yeah.
a lot
Yep.
of times when we're showing somebody a new piece of technology, it could be overwhelming. We have apprehension sometimes when you take on something new. Why? No one wants to look foolish. You could have this brilliant orthopedic surgeon, you throw, let's say, some sort of iPad with some sort of new information on them. They don't want to look foolish. So we have to
Right.
think about how can we carefully walk them through that in a way that is respectful, doesn't undermine their current knowledge. And I will tell you one thing that's actually kind of helped me throughout my career is that I'm not particularly technologically savvy, right?
Mm,
So I have to boil it down even for myself. So it's one thing to know like the full end capabilities of any technology, but the analogy I often make is that when you're working with any sort of device or technology, it's almost like you're taking on someone's new iPhone, right? My job is to figure out what apps do you need.
hmm.
That answer is going to be very different depending on your audience, or even from one surgeon to the next. Your your robot probably has so much capability above and beyond what most of us even utilize. But I need to understand, like, what is it that you value? Is it the type of surgeon who's willing to spend 20 extra minutes in the pursuit of absolute perfection? Are you trying to just get in and out, get as many cases done? Are you trying to do something as part of a broader study? So there's a lot to unpack there. But I think if you could find a way of really getting to know why is your audience taking the time to see this in the first place? What's been your experience with past technologies? And the thing is that the biggest thing I've learned in time is when we need to pause during our demos, which is that if you can learn to kind of have that internal clock in your head when to pause and how we react to that next stimulus. So, as part of asking questions, is that we do need to take that time to listen to what they're
Yeah.
telling us. Because I'm sure you've seen, Pedro, where when you have that cookie cutter demo,
Hmm.
you're you're seeing all these cues, but then you're going right past it. Whereas to then take that information that those surgeons are providing you, well, that now starts to build your story long term.
Yeah.
So it's a
Yeah.
very complicated way to say that, like, any demo has its place. And it's again, it's the crux of beginning the conversation of taking on anything new. But as we go in time, we need to start figuring out how can we use this opportunity to gain information that we're going to then advance to another stage.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but I don't think and let me say this too. So I think that just thinking about like the early days of our career.
Hmm.
Let's say that you're out of town with some teammates, and I think there's a lot of pressure on having that nightcap, right? And I think we all want to feel like it's a bonding opportunity. It's great. I've been part of it, and you need to have time to do that too. But if you got a big day the next day, I would really encourage you to get the extra sleep, maybe get your workout in the morning and crush that demo that day, because there's no amount of socialization that's going to make up for a bad demo. So if
Right.
you have that one shot where I'm talking to the new reps that just get into the business, that demo, it could either be in front of your boss, it could be in front of a prospective surgeon, it could be in front of anybody, but it's a unique opportunity that you now have to start to differentiate yourself amongst the rest.
Right.
And the other thing I would say is that practice your
Interesting.
demos. The best way I think to start practicing your demos is to maybe start with some residents where maybe
Hmm.
the penalty of failure isn't as bad, because you got to get through the bad ones to understand the good ones. And
Yeah.
like anything, it's a matter of repetition, and you learn from one to the next. But prepare as best you can. Lean on those who you've seen do it well. Pick their brain, um, but also embrace it. And as I kind of think about your audience, Pedro, is that those butterflies you feel in the interview process, like that's kind of the job of what we do. And it's
Hmm.
those who can channel that, you convert that into some sort of positive energy. Because I really think that these interviews, they're tough, they're demanding. We have a lot of like emotional investment, But I really think that those who can somehow channel that and to deliver an interview with some conviction, that to me, that's kind of like the same job where if you've got that opportunity for a big demonstration, you kind of, those butterflies are going. Same thing with trying to find your voice in the OR, right? How do you know
Mm.
the first time to speak up to an orthopedic surgeon?
Haha,
Again, you
yeah.
both said we had that imposter syndrome, but I
Yeah.
still think there's that same common ability that you see in a young rep in that interview that can will up that courage and deliver. I think if you can do that, you could probably do this business. To me, it's the same thing. You're still preparing for something, but you still got to have that internal compass to deliver. And unfortunately, some people crack and some people thrive. And to me, that's
Yeah.
kind of the business.
And to your point, the more that you practice it, the more you practice yourself in these settings, verbalizing, recognizing the curveballs that might get thrown at you in these situations, and being able to stick to the plan, but also adapt to what's in front of you is priceless, whether it's in a demo or an
Right.
interview or being in the operating room and figuring out how do I conduct myself as a full-time rep now. I'm no longer the associate in the corner, right?
Right.
That's excellent, and it's all through repetition. I'll say in minor league, major league baseball, they don't practice the diving plays. They practice the routine ground balls that you're going to get hit to you 98% of the time, and you got to make sure you get that done right. And the only way you make sure you get it done right is through repetition. And for someone who's done so many demonstrations, everything that you're saying is so spot on. I'm like seeing myself in demos that I've conducted, demos that I've been a part of, but kind of observed, demos that I've orchestrated in terms of bring people together, and all these like nerve-wracking moments where you're like, is he talking too much? Is the surgeon understanding? Is the doctor on board? Um, are the personalities getting along? This is a part. Let the doctor do it. Let them put their hands on it, right? Instead,
Well,
pause,
you're
ask,
hitting on
like
something,
all these
Pedro,
things.
which is
So
that
good.
I think that there's so many things that go into it as well, which is that I think if I were to think about, either like leadership or management, if I were to have a team that is going to be doing demos, I would want to know like, can you do it? So let's just practice it and rehearse it. But also, like to your
Mm.
point, like we're all pretty competitive, and we all like that feeling of
Mhm.
feeling heard by your surgeons, right? So if you have two people in that demo, sometimes we start competing over each other, right? And I just think that's something you better work it out before you're in front of that surgeon, because I've seen some pretty ugly scenarios where you've got some egos at play and you want to
Dude,
sound like you're the most
right?
knowledgeable to that surgeon. And to me, it's
Guilty.
also a very different. Remember, we talked about how you could be the salesperson, you could be the engineer. Sometimes that's a very different message in that demo. And I think that, you know,
Sure.
I think again, so many times we just wing this demo as opposed to taking a minute to figure out like what do we need here? What do we need to advance this situation? So it's one
Yeah.
thing if you're just showing somebody technology for the very first time. It's another if you're talking about how we're really going to integrate this into our practice. So it's different messaging. They're their own living, breathing, entities. But I also think we got to be careful about making sure we don't get in our own way.
Yes. Yeah. 100%. Understanding the biggest takeaway, if I were to point out, if I had to choose one thing that you mentioned, the importance of the demo is understanding where you're at in the sales cycle.
Yeah.
Um, because that will decide what you're looking to accomplish in when setting it up and during the demo, what needs to be said, what doesn't need to be said,
Hmm.
et cetera. So we're closing in on time here, and I want to make sure that your message gets out there in the sense of whatever it is you feel you want people to know that we haven't touched on, things you want to mention, things that are outlined to you. Is there something that you feel you want to bring up?
Yeah, I would just say that, as you get into this, it's you know, protect your network. Your network is going to be your
Mm,
currency in this business. And I think Pedro and I are a pretty good example of that. Again, we hadn't seen each other in 15 years, but there was just something that, he popped back up with this, with this podcast, and I was proud of him, and I just kind of reached out. I thought I was going to maybe get to sync up with him in Atlanta, and didn't quite work out, but here we are. And, so I think it's good to kind of be in a position where you're just generally rooting for others.
Yeah.
Um, a couple of things though that I would just be cautious of in this business as I think about your network, which is that there's some pretty high stakes stuff in this business where whether it be, a day of surgery, how a sale goes, doesn't go, and it can include a lot of emotion. And I've really learned the value of like the 24-hour rule of just not doing anything with emotion that could ultimately tarnish your reputation. So let the ebbs and flows of the business go, but like protect yourself in not making like don't send like the nastygram email when you're full of rage and you're upset over say like an
Mm,
aborted case. Don't put people under the bus.
yeah.
Take the high road, and if something spills over, make it right quickly. Um, because it just takes a couple bad things to start to, I don't know, maybe people start thinking, oh, he's a little bit of a hothead, or just protect yourself. No matter what business you end up in, it gets to be a pretty small business, right, Pedro, where we all end up kind of knowing each other a little bit. And there's not one thing that's probably worth ruining a reputation or even just a given relationship. It's high stakes stuff, but just be mindful of that, protect it. But then also like really invest in your network over time. Where again, like between you and I, Pedro, there was no agenda. Do
Right.
things for
Yeah.
others without seeking reciprocity, right? Where if things are going well for you, great. But if you could pick up somebody else that maybe needs a hand, do it. And I'm telling you, it will reward yourself in time. But there's a lot of egos in this business. We're all gunning for it. But at the end of the day, it's like we need to rely on each other a little bit for what that might, what's the next opportunity? What can you learn from? What was your perspective on something? And then you'll find that it's this community, I think, is our fuel to navigate those difficult days. I
Yeah.
see someone like Pedro succeeding. To me, it's like I feel great about it. I'm proud of you, man. Like, and I root for a
Thank
lot of
you.
people in business that are willing to take this on. And if you can find a way to manage that gauntlet and provide value to your surgeons and to patients, it's a pretty special life. It comes with a lot of sacrifice. You're going to miss stuff, but what else are you going to do? But
Yeah.
if you can improve the outcome of somebody um, in some small way, I think it's a pretty powerful, way to go about your business.
100%. I really appreciate the kind words. And I think you're spot on with the way you need to treat people and being mindful of how you're going about things. So I really, really appreciate you coming on. Like I said, I'm so glad we reconnected, which speaks to exactly what you're talking about. And I think what's funny is for someone who's been talking about products for 15 years, highly technical products, you clearly can get technical based on what you're saying, but you weren't talking so much about the product. You're talking about the reality of things and how it affects people and the best ways to go about things. And I think that says a lot about you. And you have so much to offer um, here in our industry and to people. So I hope anyone listening, I implore you to go ahead and follow Steve on LinkedIn and again, man, thank you so much for being on and this was great catching up, and I look forward to seeing staying in touch with you, and if you need anything, you let me know, brother.
Thank you, Pedro. It was great. Best of luck to you and your community. And if anybody in your community wants to reach out for some, some more specific advice, I'm happy to help in any way. But
Yeah.
I root for anybody in this business. So good luck to everybody. You may get a little bit of failure first, but just keep going. It's worth it.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to click subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And remember, if you or a friend want a job in medical sales, the best place to go is medsalesblueprint.com.